Carolina, 1847. The cotton fields were quiet that morning, too still for a house that still held 50 souls. People claimed Master Caldwell had loved those two girls above all else. He called them his daughters when the preacher visited, his help when the neighbors inquired, and his property when the papers arrived. They grew up in that dwelling, wore old dresses from his dead wife, learned to read when no one was looking, and yet when the debt came due, he signed their names on the back of a deed like it was nothing more than ink and obligation. He sold them both, two girls who called him father, for land that never grew a single stalk. Now let's return to the Carolina Sun, and the morning he informed the girls they'd be seeing new owners. The Caldwell plantation rested high on a ridge above the Yadkin River, its white columns marked with rain, its shutters shut like eyes that had witnessed too much. From the road, it still appeared proud, like every other Carolina estate built on the bones of the earth, but close up you could observe the rot, paint peeling, timber bulging, a yard now hushed from too many unpaid laborers. Inside that house lived two girls the neighbors never quite understood. They were not the master's family, though he dressed them as such. He called them his daughters, his little blessings from Providence. But behind closed doors, everyone in the kitchen knew the truth. Leah and Naomi were born in the slave quarters, the children of a woman long gone, and a man who pretended not to remember her name. Leah was 12, too sharp for her age, with a kind of quietness that made even grown men lower their voices. Naomi was 10, fairer-skinned, softer in tone, quick to smile when she still believed it was safe to. The pair moved through the Caldwell house as if they belonged nowhere and everywhere at once, between the parlor and the kitchen, between family and servant, between grace and guilt. The master, Josiah Caldwell, was a man who judged feeling the same way he assessed his fields, by what they could produce. He'd lost his wife to sickness, his sons to war, and now at 51 he had only the girls and a house that creaked with memory. He enjoyed reading to them from the good book at dusk, his voice deep and heavy, a glass of rye at his side. "The Lord tests those he loves," he would say, as the girls sat still at his feet, the lamplight flickering across their small faces. The household staff never liked those evenings. The foreman, a man called Reddick, would grumble that it was wrong for a man to act as a father to property, but no one dared question him openly. The Caldwells had been masters there since before anyone could remember, and the world outside the gate didn't care what went on inside. To the neighbors, it was a puzzle. Two brown-skinned girls in lace collars standing beside their master at Sunday service. Some said he'd gone soft, others said he was losing his mind, but when he told them, "They are mine in every way that matters," no one asked again. Still, something anxious lived in that house. The girls sensed it in the walls, the way whispers traveled at night, the way doors sometimes stayed locked until morning. Naomi would whisper, "He loves us," and Leah would agree, even when she wasn't sure, because love in that place was a word that changed meaning based on who spoke it, and before the year finished, they'd both discover just how much that word could cost. The girls' mornings started before the sun appeared, when the air was gray and thick with the scent of dew and ash. Naomi would help polish the silverware in the dining room, while Leah carried kindling to the kitchen fireplace. They were too young for labor in the fields, too delicate. Master Caldwell said, "My girls are meant for better things." He gave them handed-down gowns from his dead wife's closet, faded silks with missing buttons, the hems dragging through dirt. Naomi enjoyed twirling in them when nobody observed. Leah, older, never did. She claimed it didn't feel right to wear the clothes of a ghost. At breakfast, they sat at a little table near the window, near enough to see, but not near enough to be seen. The master read from his Bible, his voice measured and slow, pausing on the lines about obedience, about servants respecting their masters, about the Lord favoring those who submit. Naomi always listened lips slightly parted as if she were memorizing the phrases. Laya kept her gaze on the floor. Sometimes after the readings he would grin, the gentle kind that looked nearly kind, and tell them tales about their mother. He said she'd been a fine woman, quiet and grateful. He never spoke her name. He never said how she passed away. The cook, Ruthie, said she'd seen the woman once long ago, standing barefoot at the edge of the cotton field, her eyes fixed on the distant line as if she could already see freedom waiting. The house staff kept their distance. To them, the girls were a reminder of something that shouldn't exist, a line blurred between property and blood. The older women avoided their eyes. The men looked away when they passed. Only Ruthie showed them a kind of secret kindness, slipping Naomi a bit of cornbread, smoothing Laya's hair when she thought no one saw. But the overseer, Reddick, had no softness for them. He didn't like that they slept in the main house, or that Caldwell spoke to them with the gentleness of a father. "Ain't right," he told Ruthie one night loud enough for Laya to hear. "Ain't right when the master forgets who's his and who's his property." Laya didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, watching the fields, watching the fireflies blink and vanish, thinking about what it meant to belong to someone who said he loved you but still held the papers that proved he owned you. Naomi, half asleep beside her, whispered, "He wouldn't ever sell us, would he?" Laya didn't answer because she'd seen the look in the master's eyes lately, the way he lingered over maps of his land, the way his fingers trembled when he counted the coins in his desk drawer, and she'd heard him say once when he thought no one was listening, "Everything's got a price, even blessings." By the spring of 1847, the Caldwell holdings were cracking under the burden of their own pride. The winter harvest had rotted before being gathered. The tobacco, once the pride of 3 counties, had become brittle stalks in the field, and the tax collector had started riding up the long drive more often than visitors ever did. Josiah Caldwell had inherited fortune but lacked wisdom. He gambled in Charleston, lent funds to men who disappeared before settling the debt, and trusted his family name alone could hold back his ruin. But pride does not nourish the earth. The soil beneath his shoes had grown tired of him, just as the people had. At night, when he thought no one observed, he would sit alone in his study, staring at account books filled with red ink. He'd drag his finger down each entry, lumber, grain, horses, hides, whispering, "Something has worth." He kept a handgun on his table and a bottle next to it. Both offered the same kind of peace. One evening, a vehicle arrived without warning. The dogs barked. Laya peeped from the stairs, holding Naomi's hand. A tall man stepped out, his coat dark as river mud, his hair pale as bone. Mr. Alcott. The name moved through the house like a cold feeling. He was a rich landowner from 2 counties away, a man who purchased failing estates, flipped them for gain, and left their former owners with barely enough honor to keep their heads held up in church. They said he did not gamble or drink or laugh. He simply collected things. Laya and Naomi hid behind the stair rail, watching through the banister as the 2 men sat in the parlor. The master poured brandy. Alcott refused it. Their voices carried low and careful. "You've got land that should be worth more," Alcott said. "But land don't feed itself, Caldwell." Caldwell forced a laugh. "You'll get your payment. I've got assets, investments." Alcott leaned back, the firelight sharpening the lines of his face. "You've got something more valuable than silver sitting right under your roof." The silence that followed was thick. Laya didn't understand all of it. Only the sound of her name spoken too softly to be sure. The men shook hands before dawn. Alcott left with a folded piece of paper in his pocket. When Ruthie served breakfast, Caldwell didn't touch his food. He sat with his hands pressed together, staring out the window toward the empty fields. "Papa," Naomi said, shy and hopeful. He blinked, then smiled, too wide, too false. "Go on now, my girls," he said. play outside today. The sun's good for you." But when they ran into the yard, Leah noticed the way the overseer Reddick looked at her, the way men look at something already sold. The contract was settled not with ritual, but with the quiet scrape of a quill across parchment. There were no witnesses, no prayers, no mention of the divine, just the rustle of papers, the sound of a penholder against the master's desk, and the sound of a man giving up what little conscience he had remaining. Mr. Alcott had returned that morning, his carriage wheels cutting deep marks through the damp earth. The fields shimmered with heat, and even the air seemed to listen. Caldwell poured 2 glasses of whiskey, but Alcott declined again, as though alcohol was something that tainted a man's judgment. Caldwell opened the ledger he'd been staring at for months. 20 acres by the river, he said. That's good soil. Rich land, Alcott confirmed, and 2 girls from your home, fit for housework. Healthy, light-skinned, smart enough to serve inside. The records list them as goods, but I realize you have an attachment. The master's hand froze halfway through signing. He cleared his throat, adjusting his collar. You'll treat them kindly, better than most. I trust. Alcott's grin was small and cold. I treat what I own according to its value. The pen touched the sheet. His name ran across it, Josiah Caldwell. And that was that. When Alcott left, the master stayed at his desk for hours, staring at the fresh ink drying under the lamplight. He whispered something, though no one could hear it. Perhaps a prayer, perhaps an apology no one would ever receive. That night he didn't sleep. He walked the halls instead, his footsteps echoing through the house like someone pacing a cell. Every door he passed seemed to watch him. Even the portraits, his wife, his father, looked heavier somehow, as if their painted eyes carried shame. In the kitchen, Ruthie was awake, pretending to scrub pans. When she heard him enter, she stiffened. He didn't speak. He just stood there a moment, his face gray in the dim light. Finally, he said, "You've raised them well." Ruthie didn't look up. "I didn't raise them, sir. They just grew." He wanted to strike her for saying it, but he didn't. He just nodded, his lips trembling like a man who'd forgotten how to pray. Upstairs, the girls slept in the room next to his study, 2 small shapes under patchwork quilts, dreaming of nothing but the next day's sun. He stood at their door for a long time. His hand hovered near the handle, but he couldn't turn it. He whispered, "You'll be better off," though the words sounded hollow, as if he were trying to convince himself. Downstairs, the signed deed waited on his desk, a clean exchange. 20 acres of fertile land for 2 young girls. He had bought his salvation, or so he thought. The night before the wagon came, the house was too silent, the kind of calm that happens before a storm hits. Even the insects had gone silent. The lanterns burned low, shadows creeping up the parlor walls like marks that would not disappear. Ruthie stayed late in the kitchen, her hands moving slower than normal, her mind heavy with things she could not utter out loud. She'd seen the documents on the master's desk when she brought his meal, his signature neat and brutal beneath the line that held the girls' names. She knew what that signified, and she knew there was no way to reverse it. Upstairs, Naomi had dozed off with her head against Leah's shoulder, her hair sticking to her moist cheek. Leah stayed awake, eyes focused on the window. The moonlight slid across the floorboards like liquid silver, and every sound, every sigh of wood, every shift of wind felt louder than breath. She could hear voices below, men speaking softly, one of them laughing. Not the master, but the other man. Mr. Alcott's voice carried a stillness that made her skin prickle. She couldn't hear the exact words, just the tone, professional, satisfied. Then came the clinking of glasses. A celebration, and Leah understood. She didn't know about deeds or acres, but she knew the way grown men sounded when something was settled, when it was done. When the voices faded, she eased Naomi back onto the bed and crept to the landing. She peered down the stairwell. The master stood by the fire, his face lit by the glow. He wasn't smiling. He just stared into the flames, one hand gripping the mantel so tightly his knuckles whitened. Ruthie passed behind him, eyes red from tears. She looked up once and saw Leah on the stairs, her lips parted as if to say something. Run, maybe, or hide. But she didn't speak. She only shook her head, slow and helpless. Leah slipped back into the room. Naomi stirred, mumbling, "You okay?" Leah nodded, brushing her hair back. "Go to sleep," she whispered. "It's late." But she couldn't sleep, not with the sound of wagon wheels creaking in her head, not with the echo of those men's laughter still hanging in the air. When dawn began to crawl across the horizon, she held Naomi close and whispered, "No matter what happens, I won't let go. You hear me?" Naomi nodded drowsily. "Promise?" "I promise," Leah said, her voice breaking in a way Naomi was too young to notice. Downstairs the master sat slumped in his chair, an empty glass beside him, the deed folded in his coat pocket. He had told himself he would find a way to buy them back. But when the sun rose, all he could think about was how quiet the house finally felt, and how much he hated that it didn't feel wrong yet. The sun appeared heavy and white that morning, burning through the fog that rolled off the river. The house looked cleaned and hollow in the light, its paint pale as bone. Even the fowl seemed afraid to sing. Ruthie was already outdoors when she heard it, the low grind of wagon wheels turning up the main path. She froze with her apron still fastened, flour on her hands. Behind her the kitchen door swung open, and the master stepped out, his coat too fine for the warmth, his eyes hollow from a night without rest. "You arranged for them?" Ruthie said softly. He did not reply. He only looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something in his expression that nearly looked like shame. The wagon came into view, a gray horse pulling a wooden cart, the kind used for hauling tools or people, depending on who was paying. Mr. Alcott sat in the driver's seat, dressed as neat as a Sunday sermon. Behind him was a young man, a helper, or maybe just someone who didn't yet know what part he played in this. Inside the house, Naomi stood at the top of the stairs, still barefoot, still half asleep. She rubbed her eyes and smiled when she saw the master. "Papa," she said softly, "where are we going?" He tried to smile, but the skin around his mouth quivered. "You're going to visit some kind folks for a little while," he said. "A nice place. Plenty of sunshine." Naomi's face lit up. "Can Leah come too?" Leah was already standing behind her, silent. Her eyes didn't leave him. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Ruthie came to the doorway, wringing her hands. "You let them take their things?" she asked. The master hesitated. "They won't need much." "They're children," Ruthie hissed, her voice sharpened. "They're mine to decide." That was when Naomi began to cry softly at first, then in shaking sobs. She ran to him, clutching his leg. "Don't send us away, Papa. We'll be good. I'll be good." He couldn't look at her. His hand trembled as he touched her hair once, gently like blessing or goodbye. Then he stepped back. "Leah," he said, "take your sister's hand." She did. Her grip was firm, almost defiant. When they walked down the steps toward the wagon, Naomi looked back every few seconds, waiting for him to call them back, to say it was all a mistake. But he didn't. He stood at the top of the steps, his shadow long across the porch, watching them climb into the cart. Alcott tipped his hat, much obliged. The whip cracked. The horse moved. Leah didn't cry. She didn't look away. She kept her eyes on the master until the house disappeared behind the trees, until all that was left was the sound of the wheels grinding the road, and the promise she'd made echoing in her chest. The wagon rattled as it left the Caldwell estate behind, its wheels sinking into the damp red earth of the road. The morning sun beat down, sharp and cruel, baking the ground and every sorrow it held. Naomi held tight to Lia's arm, her face streaked with the salt of dry tears. She had never been farther than the creek behind the fields. Everything beyond that was the world her sister used to describe in whispers, a place with no chains, no overseer, no master. But this road didn't feel like freedom. It felt like being swallowed. Lia kept her eyes ahead. The man driving didn't speak, his back broad beneath a sun-bleached shirt. Beside him, Mr. Alcott sat upright, gloved hands folded neatly in his lap, as if he were a passenger on a Sunday outing. His silence was worse than words. The horses' feet clumped steadily against the ground. The trees lessened as they rode, replaced by wide stretches of open field, too bare, too exposed. Every curve in the path felt like a door being closed. Around midday, the driver slowed near a cluster of pine trees. "We'll stop a while," he muttered. His voice was low, deep, with the weight of someone who understood what was happening but couldn't change it. He climbed down, watered the horse, and kept his distance. Naomi tugged at Lia's sleeve. "Where's Papa's house? I don't see it." Lia didn't answer. She was staring at the dust rising behind them, the faint trail that led back to everything they'd known. The house on the hill was gone now, swallowed by distance and heat. "You hungry?" she asked, forcing her voice steady. Naomi nodded. Lia reached into the small cloth bundle Ruthie had pressed into her hands before they left. A heel of cornbread, 2 boiled eggs wrapped in cloth, a strip of dried apple. Ruthie hadn't said a word when she gave it, only pressed her hand hard and whispered, "Don't lose each other." They ate in silence. The driver glanced at them once, then away again, his jaw tight. Alcott stood by the wagon's edge, checking his watch as though measuring time like a farmer measures rain. "Back in," he said. When the shadow of the pines had shifted, the road grew rougher. The air turned heavy, sweet with the smell of magnolia and rot. By the time the wagon reached Alcott's land, the sun had fallen low behind the cypress trees, spilling gold into the distance. The field was broad and dry. No child's laughter nearby, no song from the laborers, not even a dog barking. It was a hushed sort of cruelty, the kind that didn't need to yell to be heard. Mr. Alcott's farm was bigger than Caldwell's, but it didn't feel alive. The soil was gray, crushed down from too many seasons of greed. The small houses stood in straight lines like headstones, and even the air seemed weary. The girls stepped down from the wagon and felt the heat coming up from the ground through their bare feet. A woman came to greet them, tall, straight-backed, her face partly hidden under a head covering. Mrs. Alcott. She observed the girls as one might check animals, her eyes sharp and uncaring. "These are the ones?" she inquired. Mr. Alcott nodded. "Well-behaved and healthy." Mrs. Alcott turned to Lia. "How old are you, child?" 12, Lia said quietly. "And the little one?" Naomi hid behind her sister. "She's 10, Alcott replied for her. "The older one knows some reading. You can assign her to kitchen tasks. The other can manage the wash." Mrs. Alcott's mouth tightened. "I don't like them too near the main house." He grinned. "You'll grow accustomed to it." That night, the sisters were taken to a small washroom behind the kitchen. 4 walls, no openings, a dirt floor. Ruthie's bread bundle was gone, and no one offered food. Lia sat on the ground with Naomi huddled against her, the small child's thin fingers grasping her sleeve even while sleeping. Through the cracks in the boards, Lia could see the fields glowing under moonlight, hundreds of bent backs moving slowly, rhythmically. She could hear the crack of the foreman's whip sounding in the distance, each noise flattening against her chest like a heart pulse she couldn't calm. When dawn came, a kitchen girl named Esther woke them. She was older, with strong arms and a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes. She handed Leah a ragged apron and said, "Don't let the mistress see you idle. She ain't got much kindness for new hands, especially the ones that come dressed too fine." Leah nodded, though she couldn't find her voice. Naomi just stared at the doorway as if expecting their old master to walk in and take them home, but no one came. The day began with scrubbing pots, fetching water, sweeping floors. By nightfall, Naomi's small hands were blistered and Leah's back ached from bending. When they lay down again, Naomi whispered, "When do we go back?" Leah hesitated. Then she said softly, "We don't. Not now." Naomi was quiet for a while. Then she said, "He'll come for us." Leah turned toward the wall. "Maybe," she said, but her voice sounded like someone who already knew he wouldn't. At Alcott's plantation, work began before the light touched the fields. The bell clanged before dawn, a hollow sound that seemed to echo off every wall. The older workers rose from their cabins like shadows coming back to life. But for Leah and Naomi, that first morning was a blur of noise, heat, and orders shouted too quickly to understand. Mrs. Alcott managed the kitchen like a captain commands a unit. Every pot had to gleam, every plate had to be spotless before the morning meal. The air was heavy with the odor of smoke and fat, and Naomi, small and unused to the warmth, coughed until tears fell down her face. "Keep her moving," Esther whispered, pushing a pail into Leah's hands. "Don't let the mistress see her rest." They scrubbed until their fingers hurt and their wrists ached. The floors were never spotless enough. The woman in the bonnet paced the width of the kitchen, striking the wood with her stick, her eyes seeking a mistake. When she passed Naomi, she paused. "This one's soft," she said. "If she doesn't become strong, she'll be sent outside." Leah's stomach tightened. "She can do it, ma'am. She just needs a sharp look." "Cut her off." "Did I ask your thoughts, girl?" Leah lowered her eyes. "No, ma'am." By midday, Naomi's hands had blistered, her palms raw from the scrubbing. When she spilled a pot of water, Mrs. Alcott struck her with the cane. Once, not hard enough to break skin, but hard enough to make the child flinch. Leah moved between them, pulling Naomi behind her. "I'll do her work," she said. The woman studied her for a long moment, then smiled thinly. "Maybe you will." That evening, Leah carried buckets until her arms shook, until her feet bled from walking on the uneven stone floor. She never complained. Naomi followed her everywhere, quiet, too frightened now to speak above a whisper. When the kitchen finally emptied, the two of them sat on the floor in the dim light of a dying fire. Esther slipped them each a crust of bread, her face drawn but kind. "Don't talk back," she said softly. "Don't cry where she can see. Cry when you sweep. She don't look at you then." Naomi leaned her head against Leah's shoulder. "I don't like it here," she murmured. Leah stroked her hair, her thumb brushing the bruise that had bloomed along her temple. "I know," she said. "We'll find a way. I'll find a way out." The cicadas hummed, the same sound they'd heard at home, but it felt different now, emptier. In the distance, the men's quarters flickered with faint lamplight. From somewhere in the dark, a song rose, low, tired, almost prayer-like. The words were lost to the night, but the tone carried something ancient, something that refused to die, even here. Naomi fell asleep to it. Leah stayed awake, her hands still trembling, staring into the embers. She had never hated silence more. Back in Carolina, the Caldwell plantation sat under a thick silence. The fields had turned to tall grass, the barns slumped, and the laborers moved more slowly now, part from resentment, part from hunger. The master's tone no longer carried the same weight. He had traded more than he knew. Josiah Caldwell sat at his table most days, the same table where he had signed the paper that sold the girls. The documents were gone now, but he still gazed at the surface, tracing invisible marks with his finger. He had convinced himself it was his only option. 20 acres of fertile ground for the chance of recovery, but no water had arrived, and the new land produced nothing. He had not eaten properly in days. The whiskey was his only company. One night, when the moonlight bled across the desk, he took out a sheet of paper and dipped his pen. The ink spread fast, like blood from a small wound. To Mr. Alcott, I trust this finds you and your household well. I write to inquire after the 2 girls, Leah and Naomi, who accompanied you some weeks ago. He stopped. His hand hovered over the words. What could he ask? What right did he have to ask? He had signed them away. He had turned their names into currency. He tried again. They were raised as my own. I wish only to know if they are safe. Safe. The word looked foolish on the page. He knew men like Alcott didn't care for safety. They cared for profit, for obedience, for ownership. He leaned back, his throat tight. The house groaned as the wind moved through the shutters. Somewhere he thought he heard footsteps, the sound of 2 small bodies moving softly through the hall, whispering to each other in the dark. He rubbed his eyes. It's just the wind, he muttered. But the sound lingered anyway, as though the house itself had remembered their names. When dawn came, the candle had burned to the end, and the letter still sat unfinished. The ink had dried to a dull brown. Caldwell read it again, then tore the page clean down the middle. He fed it to the fireplace, one strip at a time. The paper curled and blackened, the edges glowing before turning to ash. He poured another drink and waited. The summer arrived thick and brutal, bearing down on Alcott's land like a penalty. The days extended, and the nights gave no relief, just air heavy with perspiration and the noise of insects that never ceased singing. Naomi did not handle the heat well. By the 3rd week, she started to weaken. Her skin turned pale beneath the grime, her lips cracked, her eyes dull and lifeless. She coughed through the dark hours, and Leah could feel the heat pouring off her like fire. When she requested medicine from the kitchen mistress, the woman laughed. Medication for her, she dismissed. For there isn't enough to waste on the frail. Let her rest. If she is meant to live, she will. So Leah did what she could. She stole cool liquid from the well and put damp cloths on Naomi's forehead. She fanned her with a rag through the unending nights, murmuring forgotten lullabies, songs their mother had once hummed while shelling peas in the kitchen back home. Soft, low, the kind of sound that made a child feel protected even when the world was burning. Esther helped where she could. She smuggled herbs wrapped in linen, whispered prayers from the old ways when no one was near. The fever must break, Esther said. If it doesn't break by morning, she will be gone. That night Leah didn't close her eyes once. Naomi lay curled on the cot, her breath shallow and ragged. Each exhale sounded like it could be the last. The sweat soaked through the thin blanket, the smell of sickness heavy in the room. By dawn, the steady, slow rain began to fall. Mrs. Alcott came through the kitchen that morning and asked, "Is the little one dead yet?" Esther's jaw tightened. "Not yet." Mrs. Alcott merely shrugged. "Then she will be soon. Don't waste time burying her deep. The ground's too wet for it." When she left, Leah sat by her sister's side, holding her hand as the first light touched the window. Naomi's eyes fluttered open once more, just long enough to find her sister's face, and then she whispered something too soft for the world to keep. By the time the sky lightened, Naomi's breathing had turned to small, broken sighs, the kind that carry more silence than air. The fever had left her body, but it had taken something with it. Leah could feel it in the stillness, in the way the morning sounds, the creak of boards, the far-off murmur of workers, seemed to fade around her. Naomi's skin was cool beneath her touch, her lips cracked, but trembling with faint words. Leah leaned close, her hand cupping the back of her sister's head. "Don't let them take me," Naomi whispered. Her voice was thin, like paper tearing in the wind. Don't let them bury me out there. Leah shook her head fast. No one's taking you, you hear? You're staying with me. We'll go home. Naomi's eyes moved once more, then settled. Esther returned, her face solemn, and said, "It's time, child." Then she reached for the small cloth and pulled it over the child's face. Leah grabbed her wrist. "Don't!" Esther's eyes softened. "You can't stop what's done, girl." "I said don't," Leah whispered. Her voice cracked but carried something cold beneath it. Esther nodded slowly, her mouth pressed thin. "All right, then. You keep her a while. I'll tell the overseer she's resting." When Esther left, Leah lay beside her sister, wrapping her arms around that small, weightless body. She stayed like that for hours until the air grew warm again and the flies began to gather near the door. Finally, when she could feel her own breath trembling, she sat up. Naomi's hand had fallen limp against her arm. Leah lifted it and placed it back across her chest, smoothing her dress as if preparing her for sleep. Then she whispered, "I won't let them take you." Outside, the bell rang for the midday meal. The plantation moved on as though nothing had changed. But in that small windowless room, Leah held her promise like a weapon, and for the first time in her life she felt something stronger than fear. They came for Naomi's body before the sun set. Two farm hands Leah didn't know, faces grim, eyes downcast, carried a rough wooden container between them. The box was small, too small. They did not look at her when they entered the washroom. They had done this task before. Leah stood in front of them. The men followed her as she walked behind the house, past the long rows of workers' cabins. The air was thick and golden with dust, the sun sinking low behind the trees. They led her toward the far boundary of the field, where the ground sloped toward a thin group of magnolia trees. It was where they buried the people who passed away under Alcott's name. The soil was already open, a shallow hole, damp from the recent rain. Leah kneeled by it, her hands pressed into the dirt. "She is not meant to be here," she whispered. "She was only a child." The taller man cleared his voice. "None of us are meant to be here." They lowered the box into the pit. Leah watched it settle, the sound of it hitting the base dull and certain. She stayed long after they left. The sky turned red, then purple, then dark. The night insects began their song again, uncaring. Back in Carolina, the Caldwell plantation sat under a thick silence. The fields had gone to weeds, the barns sagged, and the laborers moved more slowly now, half from hunger, half from resentment. The master's voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. He had traded more than he knew. Josiah Caldwell sat at his desk most days, the same desk where he'd signed the deed that sold the girls. The papers were gone now, but he still looked at the surface, tracing invisible lines with his finger. He had told himself it was the only way. 20 acres of good land for the promise of recovery, but no rain had come, and the new soil yielded nothing. He had not eaten properly in days. The whiskey was his only company. Mr. Alcott came again. He appeared without warning, always punctual, always polite, and always bringing a chill with him. By midsummer, the fields around Caldwell's home had begun to drown again. The rains came without mercy, turning the dirt to sludge and the air to steam. One morning, with thunder muttering low in the distance, a carriage stopped in front of the house. Ruthie saw it first from the porch and muttered, "Lord, not again." Caldwell met Alcott in the parlor. Alcott's coat was dry, his boots spotless. He did not sit. He spoke plainly. "The new land is poor, Caldwell. The soil is too clay-heavy. It won't hold water." Caldwell looked down at the floor. "I sold you 20 acres of prime land. The papers are signed." Alcott smiled. "Papers can be wrong, but I still own the girl. Leah works steady in the kitchen. Hard to find fault with her." Something broke quietly inside Caldwell. Then, no sound, just a shift, as if the ground had given out beneath him. "The younger one," he repeated. She's gone." Alcott sighed, but not like a man mourning, more like a man reciting an inconvenience. "She was buried near the Magnolia Grove. I trust you won't hold me accountable for what Providence decides." Caldwell turned away, the world swimming at the edges of his vision. The rain began to fall, steady and cold. It ran down his face and neck, and for a moment he didn't know if he was shaking from grief or guilt, or if the two had finally become the same thing. "You might visit," Alcott said as he adjusted his hat. "Some men find comfort in seeing what's been lost, though I doubt comfort's ever been your gift." Without waiting for a reply, he climbed back into his carriage and was gone, wheels cutting fresh scars into the muddy road. Caldwell stood in the rain long after the sound faded. The water soaked through his coat, plastered his hair to his forehead. His lips moved soundlessly, mouthing her name like prayer or confession. He found Ruthie sitting by the cold hearth, staring into it as though it still held fire. "You saw her?" she said softly. "She's grown. She hates you." He paused, then shook his head. "No, she don't hate. Hate means she still got something to give." Ruthie sighed. "You're seeking peace, Master Caldwell. You won't find it in this house. You sold it away." He didn't argue. "I thought I'd find mercy in time," he said. "But time is crueler than God." Ruthie studied him for a long moment. "Then pray she forgets you." When she was sure no one was watching, she put her hands into the fresh earth, digging until her nails tore. She wanted to feel the box again to be sure Naomi was truly still there, not gone, not lost somewhere too far. Her quiet words were steady, her heart not shaking. She promised her sister, not to the air, but to the deep, silent ground. She would never let go, not of the memory, not of the truth, and not of the promise. When she returned, she found Ruthie waiting. "Master Caldwell is gone," Ruthie said, her voice a low murmur. "He rode out this morning, didn't say where." Leah looked out the window. The sky was the color of a bruised peach. "He'll be back," she said. "They always come back." But Caldwell didn't return to the house. He rode to Alcott's land instead. It took 2 days of hard riding. When he arrived, his horse was lathered in sweat. The overseer, a man half his age, came out to meet him, squinting under the afternoon sun. "You from the Caldwell place?" Caldwell nodded. "I'm here to see a girl, Leah." The overseer gave him a slow, measuring look. "We don't get many visitors for the help. She's down by the well." Leah found her little sister's dress, one of the pale muslin gowns she had worn, hanging on a nail in the washroom. It was too thin to provide warmth, too small to be useful. But Leah took it, held it to her face, breathing in the scent of long-gone soap and dust, and the fainter scent of Naomi. She pressed the garment to her chest and did not cry, because she would not waste the water. She waited until the night, until the others slept, and then she walked out. She carried the dress and a small rusted shovel. She went to the Magnolia Grove. There was no moon, only the stars and the immense silent dark. She found the mound of earth, the place where the dirt had settled. She started digging. Slowly, carefully, moving the heavy clay away, trying not to make noise. It took hours. Her hands were raw, her arms aching, her whole body shaking with strain. But she kept going. When the shovel finally hit the wood, the dull thud echoed in the silence. She reached into the hole, brushing the dirt away from the pine box until she could feel the surface. She spoke to the box, just like she had promised. "I'm here," she whispered. "I brought your favorite dress. I won't let you be cold." She lay the fragile cotton dress on the lid. Then she began to put the dirt back, scooping it with the shovel and her hands, covering the box again, heavier this time, stronger. When she was finished, the first signs of dawn were showing on the horizon. She was exhausted, covered in mud, but she felt a strange, quiet peace. She had kept her word. The master, Josiah Caldwell, dismounted and walked the path himself, boots sinking into the damp earth. The air smelled of iron and wet cotton. He passed the cabins, rows of grey wood, smoke curling from their chimneys, and it struck him how alike they all were, how easily a person could disappear here without the world ever noticing. He found her near the well, bent over a wooden bucket. She was older now, thinner, tougher. Her arms, once thin, were lined with muscle, her hair tied back in a rough braid. When she looked up, her eyes met his, and the rope slipped from her fingers. They stood staring at each other for a long moment. He tried to speak first. "Laya," the name caught in his throat like something sharp. "You've grown." She said nothing. "I came to see how you were," he managed. "I heard about your sister." "I don't," she said. The word was soft, but it landed like a blow. He came back the next day, and the day after that, always at the same time, just before sundown, when the heat broke and the sky turned the color of rust. He never announced himself, never went past the boundary line. He simply stood near the well, watching her fetch water, pretending he still had the right to be there. On the third evening, he spoke again. "I couldn't sleep for months after I let you leave," he said. "I thought maybe if I came here I could fix it somehow." Laya didn't stop working. You don't mend things by watching them suffer. He pulled out a small, worn wooden figure, a little rabbit he had carved for her years ago. He stepped closer, holding it out anyway. "You were children. I tried." "Don't say that word," she said sharply. "Tried means you failed. Don't dress it up." "You've grown," he said finally. Laya's voice was low, steady. "And you've shrunk," he asked quietly. "Will you ever forgive me?" She returned to the well, grabbing the rope. "Forgiveness is for people who got something left to give. You took all of mine." The road home was longer this time. When he looked back one last time, she was still there, back straight, shoulders square, the image of someone who had stopped needing him a long time ago. For the first time in his life, Josiah Caldwell understood what it meant to be forgotten. A storm came that evening. The sky turned a sickening green and the wind began to roar through the trees. The lightning was a painful white. Laya was still in the washroom when the rain started. She went to the back window. She pressed her hand to the glass. "Naomi," she breathed, her chest tightened, torn between dread and yearning. The storm raged harder. She grabbed the shawl from the chair and ran. Ruthie called after her from the kitchen as the front door flew open. "Girl, don't you go out there. You'll drown in that sky." But Laya didn't stop. Her bare feet hit the mud, water splashing up her legs, the wind clawing at her dress. Lightning split the sky in a white flash, and she saw her. The little figure by the magnolias, head bowed, hands clasped. When she reached the grove, there was nothing there, only the old grave, the dirt soft and sunken, the rain running down it like tears. She fell to her knees, breath coming in sharp gasps. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I never let them take you." The wind howled through the trees, breaking branches, and the air filled with the scent of earth and magnolia. Then she heard it, a gentle, low hum, childlike, the same lullaby Naomi used to sing. It moved through the rain, wrapping around her like arms she could not see. For the first time in years, Laya closed her eyes and let herself cry. And miles away inside his house, Josiah Caldwell heard the same tune, faint, rising through the walls like smoke, and whispered, "I hear you. I hear." The preacher came, but Ruthie refused to look at him. "There's no heaven worth going to if I can't see them again," she had said. The land was purchased and traded again. Inspectors arrived, drove markers, took notes, but nothing ever settled there. Machines rusted, crops failed, houses sank into the damp earth. Eventually, they quit trying. The land had made its decision, and perhaps that was fairness, not the kind written in account books or rules, but the kind that lives in memory, dirt and rain, the kind that waits. The tale of the Caldwell sisters vanished from the papers, but not from the ground, because the South holds on to its spirits, even when it forgets their names. If you ever find yourself driving through that region of Carolina, past the fields where the air feels heavier than it should, roll your window down. Listen closely. You might hear a song, soft, low, like the hum of someone rocking a child. And when you do, recall this. Not every haunting is born from hate. Some come from a love that refused to end, even when the body did. That's the story of Leah and Naomi Caldwell, and the land their father traded them for. A land that never forgave him, and a promise that never released its hold.